good afternoon from Ithaca, New York, home of Cornell University. I'm Nicholas Phillips, and thank you so much for joining us for another great keynote. Today, we're talking about natural language processing, which is an expanding area of artificial intelligence. Let's face it, we've all been misunderstood when we send a text message or email via voice text. Getting your message across in the right tone is hard enough. Adding the fact that AI sometimes can't understand sarcasm or the difference between Jaguar the car and Jaguar the animal, and things can get lost in translation. However, organizations are continuing to employ NLPs for textual analysis and classification, and even more advanced tasks like writing, coding, and yes, even reasoning. And today we'll help you understand some of the future applications of this integral part of AI. And with that, I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Oleg Melnikov. He serves as a visiting lecturer for the Browers College of Computing and Informational Sciences here at Cornell University. Dr. Melnikov has experience in statistics, machine learning, and programming, and he also happens to be the faculty author of our NLP certificate program here for eCornell. Oleg, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting Nicholas.
Awesome. So audience, before we get started, we want to kind of learn a little bit about you, and we want to kind of hear some of your feedback as well. So the first thing we want to do is kind of learn a little bit about you, our audience. So we have a question for you. You can scan this QR code with your phone, and we'll get in some of your responses. And we also welcome your questions as well. So to our first question for you, our audience, we want to know, what industry do you work in? What do you do for a living? And like I said, scan that QR code and we'll get some of your responses in live. And as we wait for some of your responses, Oleg, I want to kind of start our conversation off really kind of baselining the foundation of NLP. So we hear all the time about advances in artificial intelligence, and obviously natural language processing is a branch of AI. So I want to kind of baseline our conversation and ask you, what is natural language processing?
That's a very good question. It's the NLP is an ambiguous term, and many people are looking for a more precise definition. It has to do with automated processing of natural language, the language we tend to speak in, as opposed to a structured language which is defined as to follow a particular structure that computers can interpret. It has sets of very precise rules. The natural language has been developed over thousands of years, and it has many exceptions besides rules, and that's why it's difficult to learn a new language, mostly because of all these different special cases. So we're trying to use the language exceptions and language structure to some degree. There is still a structure, and program computers or program code so that it can understand the context and some of the semantic meaning. That is a process of NLP, or that is a natural language processing, where we take massive sizes text or lots of text snippets, and we pass them through some sort of code, through some sort of algorithm, and extract what is important for us for a particular task.
And I know that, artificial intelligence has been around for quite a while, but when did the concept of computers and applications trying to understand human language really take hold?
Great question. And as the immediate answer comes to mind, it's probably the introduction of computers. But if we look at this a bit deeper, the NLP probably started with encryption, and people way before computer time trying to encrypt messages, let's say during wars thousands of years ago, when they tried to take a message written in a particular language, say English, for instance, and translate it or modify it in some way using sets of rules so that the enemy would not understand what that message is, even if it's intercepted. So those rules need to be used in encrypting and decrypting messages so that it can be transferred safely. And that is a form of NLP. And I'm sure there are examples when NLP was used historically before even that time. I can't think of any right now, but that's, I think, is one example. And then as the time passed by, we had computers, that would help us, and that's last century, that would help us process numbers and text. And that was another sort of age of expanding NLP and text processing. People, ever since introduction of computers, were fascinated by automating what a human being was able to do previously. And with that automation comes scaling. So as more companies were interested in NLP just took a life of its own, all the way to the present days when we have very sophisticated models actually trying to answer questions from an individual and reply back with an answer in the context of that individual, which is highly, it seemed like magic just a few years back, but it is a
Mhm.
reality now.
Awesome. And audience, I want to thank you all for your responses. And we're slowly starting to get some responses in here. So we have investment, technology, education. So a little all over the map here. And I'm thinking of kind of some of our audience responses here, Oleg. And are there certain industries that are really, adapting and really taking on NLP and really utilizing NLP in their kind of everyday work life?
That's a very good question because NLP has penetrated through a wide variety of industries. And of course, tech industry comes to mind first, but that's where the tools are being developed and the advancements are being made. Once the tech industry develops tools that are easy to adapt by mainstream companies, then the NLP just takes off to different corners or different sectors of the industry. So, for instance, anywhere where there is a customer service, NLP is used, and pretty much every company has a customer service department or function. And with that function comes a necessity to process thousands, millions, perhaps billions of requests from customers, and NLP is a great tool for handling these requests. But then there are other uh, companies that are highly interested in adapting NLP for different kinds of searches. So Google or Yandex and many other search companies are adopting NLP so that uh, the search requests can be processed and used to scan billions or trillions of documents collected from the web in different form, different languages. Um, and the result, very specific results that the person is highly likely looking for are returned to that individual. So there are many examples like that, and those examples go beyond the tech industries to pretty much any companies that has some sort of text, and it actually goes even beyond text. So in genetics, for instance, um, oftentimes genes are considered or represented by letters, by four letters, A, C, G, T, and they can be treated as text. And even in those unusual places, the NLP has a wide use and implementation.
And audience, again, I want to thank you for your responses and all that. And technology obviously was a big one. When you talk about this transition from, just in the tech space to, other organizations and other fields and everything. How long can that transition take between just, working in the tech space to now it has applications like you mentioned in genetics? How long can that take?
The transitions are, well, they're speeding up, and it used to be where decades would take for a major transition through NLP field, but it is much faster now that we have tools that help us develop new tools. In particular, there's a big hope for ChatGPT, which is a top of the notch large language model, to help us develop new tools where it would take many hours from a developer to create and test the functionality of a particular language tool. Now, ChatGPT or different code development models, which are also language processing models, can develop those tools much faster. So we can experiment faster. We can choose tools that are more suitable for our particular task, whether it's for the company or for individual use. and experimentation just is far more rapid than it used to be.
And I'd be interested to know what organization comes to mind for you when you think of really taking this concept of NLP and running with it. What organization comes to mind for you?
The tech sector is certainly in one of those sectors where the companies are dealing with NLP, and I already named a couple of search companies. There are many other ones. Academia has a great, and it's not something that comes to mind immediately, but academia has great advances in NLP. What they develop is usually cutting edge, and they are able to release many of their developments immediately into the market for the developers to take use of, take advantage of. But again, anything from food companies like McDonald's to let's say um, construction companies, all of these companies have uses for NLP. The companies I work for, which had to do with marketing, are still work and use in NLP domain. They use NLP tools to clean out their data sets. They have billions of websites that they evaluate, and they need to sort those websites and need to compress the data from those websites into a much more manageable space, and to save money, of course, to save costs, but also to do their searches fast. So marketing companies, not just the digital marketing, but even traditional marketing companies, food chains, I'm sure oil and gas companies are also using NLP. Basically, anywhere there is an opportunity to process text or anything like text would use NLP and benefit from it.
And you mentioned text and audience. This actually brings us to our second audience question for you. So again, scan the QR code with your phone. You could submit your responses there. So we want to know, do you use any of these? And there's a couple selections you can choose from. So voice to text, predictive text, Google Translate, Grammarly, or other. These are some NLP programs. So we want to know, do you use any of these softwares? And we'll wait for your responses. So I want to kind of transition a little bit, Oleg, and I want to know, what are some websites or applications that use NLPs that we may not necessarily think of right away? And I know I touched on some a little bit when I was mentioning some of the responses for our audience.
Good question. So I already named the uses of NLP in genetics, and this may not be something that immediately comes to mind. There's a great research that is quickly developing in the field of genetics, where given a string of DNA, we can use NLP to, well, first of all, reassemble the DNA from small pieces. That is an NLP task as well, and it's cheaper to do the sequencing of a DNA into small pieces as opposed to a single DNA string. This is something that has been developed recently, and it has made a tremendous success in the field. But then after the DNA is reassembled, NLP tasks and machine learning tasks together can be used to classify those DNA into, let's say, a bank or a type of virus, or a particular category of disease or treatment, and anything else that can be useful for either classification of this pieces of information. The DNA is just a piece of information, or looking for better treatments for individuals, or quickly identifying a particular disease or bacteria or species of viruses. That's one field which is fairly unusual, or may not come to mind immediately. Of course, probably um, a bit more not realistic, but uh, um, sensible or immediately accessible example is search, just document search in particular. But search not just a document in the web, but there are many very specific, very specialized cases of search. For instance, legal documents There are tools, companies like LexisNexis, for instance, that makes search over billions of documents fast and user-friendly. But there are also companies insurance companies and medical companies that use NLP to search through patients' notes, through doctor's notes, through claims that have been made by let's say, healthcare company to the insurance company. And both sides of this transaction, the medical companies or hospitals that submits the claims on behalf of a particular patient, and an insurance company that receives those claims, they both use NLP to validate that the diagnosis and the charges have been made correctly. So they are interested in using NLP to extract key dates, key diseases from those documents. And we're talking about billions and billions of documents on a regular basis, say monthly basis, dates and dosages and so on. Those are less um, less popular or less well-known uses of NLP.
And audience, thank you so much for some of your responses. And again, we'll continue to take your questions. So we're slowly starting to get some audience responses as far as what do they use the most as far as NLP programs go. And it looks like Google Translate really is kind of the big one here, which is not surprising. I myself use Google Translate, and you mentioned LexisNexis earlier, and I remember using that a lot when I was a reporter working kind of in the news industry. So with those folks who use Google Translate, how does NLP, or rather, how is NLP utilized as far as Google Translate goes?
That's a very good question. It's not immediately obvious that when a request comes in a search request comes into a Google window, there are multiple models that are taking care of a search. So when the search result is executed, different models will tend to have a bias to searching for a particular pattern. So some models are looking for an exact pattern from a bank of documents compressed to exact patterns, and some search algorithms or algorithms that will look for documents and returns those documents will look for semantic meaning. And even when the results come back from all these different algorithms, they need to be shuffled in such a way so as not to represent or overrepresent a particular document in an annoying series of pretty much identical documents. So there's another NLP task that takes advantage of shuffling the results that are most likely and at the same time fairly diversified back to the user. So that's an interesting question about the search in web search. And there are different types of metrics that are used with all of these different algorithms. These metrics are being maintained and tuned by groups of scientists, which are making our lives easier. Oh, Nicholas, we can't hear you.
There we go. Justin actually brings up a really great point as a nice little follow-up. And Justin, thank you for your question. So Justin asks, how do we filter false positives? So, fine tuning, there's a lot of trust in these AIs and it's hard to verify. So I think what Justin's trying to get at is, kind of how do we, kind of decipher between, what we want versus maybe what we don't want?
Another good question, and this is a hard task to do or to automate. There were a number of models that would fail specifically because they would return great results mixed with false positives, and the true positives that people actually wanted to see, they were chopped off or sent to a trash can, so to speak. So this can be done in a number of ways. One is to look for them in some way manually. So you either have users to tag whether the results are not what they were been looking for, or you have experts that are looking at user behavior and marking those results as false positives. And then this classified or labeled results are sent back into the model. If the model is trainable, it can be post-trained to learn that the results that they were returned before were not high in popularity, were not as usable as the model predicted them to be in first place. But there are more automated tools, and all of these tools are used in combination. I don't think, or at least larger companies, they can afford to implement multiple algorithms in parallel. Some of the automated tools can be used to observe in automated fashion the user behavior. And if the user, for instance, looks at the search result and follows the link, if we're talking about web search, and then comes back within too short of a time, let's say 5 seconds instead of 30 seconds, then perhaps the search result wasn't the intended or wasn't usable for that particular user. So that can also be monitored in a quantitative way. It could be measured so as to measure the sort of satisfaction label or user satisfaction experience, and then try to improve it mechanically.
Interesting. And you mentioned, organizations and them utilizing NLP. So do you, I guess, see a lot more organizations saying, hey, this is a great technology, we really need to utilize this technology? Do you see its applications growing as organizations have grown?
Absolutely. The thing is that internet itself made the business expansion possible to beyond the borders of a single country or even local mom and pop store. Businesses can now sell their products within the country or outside of the country, and for that reason, they will need NLP to handle many more customers, not just in different languages, but also in the same language. They need to be able to find for the customer the products that the customer is interested in. And that requires NLP and many other advanced tools to match the customer with the product, regardless of the language, regardless of all these different um, um, uh, differences that may be expected of a customer in different region with different level of expertise in the product and so on. So that needs to be automated, and that's where NLP is needed. So many companies that are expanding rapidly, they are looking for these solutions, whether they develop them in-house or go and buy them from a tech company. This is still a use of NLP. So it may not be a raw NLP that the company deals with, but it will be some sort of NLP algorithms that is underlying whichever tool the company is using. So even if we look at many influencers, for instance, or even companies selling their product or advertising their product on Facebook and Google, they will use some sort of dashboards to track or keep track, even in YouTube as well, to keep track of the performance of their advertisement or their sales or their views. And many of those tools that are compiling together uh, distributions for keywords or um, ways of managing keywords and phrases and text and advertisement and so on. Many of those tools will be NLP based.
And you mentioned, Chat GPT a little bit earlier. Is there one major NLP tool that you're seeing a lot, that a lot of organizations are utilizing nowadays?
Good question. So ChatGPT is certainly a big hype in a good sense. It is being experimented with by many, by the companies, by the individuals. So this is used to a large degree. It's a sensation of some sort, where everybody wants to try it, but it may not be commercially viable for many cases just yet. There are many other tools that I think are suitable for the companies um, that the companies that process a large volume of text. They can't necessarily pay for ChatGPT because that will be a huge cost overrun, but they can try something that is already mainstream NLP, such as so-called word vectors, or a way of encoding text with numeric sequences or numeric boxes or numeric vectors, so to speak. And that allows for many algorithms or mathematical tools to be used on those numeric or those numbers to extract the semantic representation or extract documents or find whatever that business is interested in that particular set of documents. So those tools are more applicable to businesses that deal with large volumes of data. And of course, there are sets of algorithms that have been around for a while. They're much faster, they're more limited, but they're fast and cheap. So they are used by many companies. And we're talking about um, regex, for instance, regular expression searching tools. There are many packages that in Python and many other languages that allow for searching exact keywords or patterns of keywords and phrases in the text, and they are widely used throughout. So there are really clusters of NLP tools that are used at different companies, depending on the company's scale and ability to absorb the costs associated with NLP tools, and they are not cheap. So the smarter tools such as ChatGPT and large language models, they can get very expensive. So they are used in rare cases, but for more precise handling of requests from individuals.
And you stole my next question, actually, was, how affordable are some of these NLP programs? Obviously, the, major large organizations, the Googles, the Metas, the LinkedIn's probably can afford to, pay for Chat GPT. But what about some of the smaller organizations, maybe like a family run business or, a regional business? How affordable are some of these NLP programs for them, at least?
Question. So if we're not talking about coding itself, where you need an engineer or a programmer to code in Python, all of these different wonderful tools, then many of these NLP tools come for free. So many of these large companies such as Google, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, they will give NLP or share NLP-based tools with the users so as to relieve the user from the coding experience. Somebody likes it, but not everyone. But at the same time, to provide user-friendly interfaces for searching for those tools. Each individual, in some sense, can do a web search without any additional cost or any explicit cost. I'm sure there is the cost of time and looking at the advertisement, but for the most part, it's relatively free. And in the same way, ChatGPT makes their tool free to non-commercial users. I'm not sure about their licensing agreement, but many of these tools will at least allow free use or experimentation with their tools. And then if we get into coding, then the cost, of course, would be setting up the environment where an experienced engineer would code for a company to develop a tool or a search or some sort of document processing, which is very specific or highly specific for that companies that has not been readily accessible by the tech giants. And in that case, the costs would be the engineering, actually having an engineer do that, maybe engineering team, but also the cloud services where this text would be stored. The Yeah, the cost could vary a great deal. But to give a few numbers, ChatGPT in particular took months to develop, and it really cost just the training itself, just the resources would be millions of dollars if we're not counting the engineering resources. And that's what's expected of a large language model these days, where a significant amount of time and effort and computational resources that are very costly, millions of dollars, are used to develop this wonderful models, but then the use of the model is relatively cheap. So not not every company needs to develop a large language model, but once it's developed, it can be reused, which significantly drops the cost of applying NLP for one's business.
Okay. So it sounds like organizations really need to balance, how important is it to utilize NLP versus how much it'll cost? Is that kind of what you're trying to get at?
Exactly. There's always this balance or trade-off of how much it would cost. And my recommendation is always if a company or an engineer is trying to use some of these tools that are not yet familiar with, is to try small. Take a small sample which doesn't cost money to store and process, primarily engineering effort or engineering time, and then develop some sort of model that produces results more significant than random. And once that have been established, it's easier to sell to one's management that this is a valuable tool, ask for resources, and keep scaling up to the point where the benefit is no longer clearly visible. So at that point, you stop and move on to the next project.
And thinking about utilizing NLPs and balancing the cost and all that good stuff, what are some benefits for not just large organizations, of smaller organizations as well? What are some of the benefits of utilizing NLP technology for them?
Good question. And the benefit is always to either save costs or make more profit. But as easy as it sounds, it's not always as easy to even measure. So it's not clear how many resources or how much of a cost is attributed to a particular NLP task. But the businesses, when they're scaling up, they want to sell their product and support to more customers and support more customers with their product. And to do that, they need to attend to every client or customer. And there's some automations that needs to be done at some point. It's clear in some sense that some tasks are repetitive and some tasks are unique. And these repetitive tasks can be scaled up using this NLP. And at the same time, or in the same manner, the costs are oftentimes managed or shrunk by the use of NLP. One example would be when a customer service handles calls. Each call can be fairly expensive, whether it's call from a banking client or let's say a mobile phone user. These calls can be need to be handled by an expert, and the first level expert can't handle very specific cases, so it's advanced up. But if ChatGPT or a large language model of some sort is used to handle many of these cases, then many of them can be resolved even before an expert is called. This higher level expert, let's say, is called into the process, and which would be more expensive. So it doesn't need to be just large language models. Oftentimes we either log in through, or we connect to some sort of menu, we observe or hear on the phone some sort of menu which we can select from to navigate to our particular problem with our service or our product. And that is already use of NLP. This navigational system, whether it's on screen or whether it's on the phone, is part of NLP process. And that navigation already removes some of the, or saves up some of the time from a human being expert that could have been used and used otherwise, and burned companies' money on customer service. So that is saved. The quality of this type of customer service experience has been rapidly increasing. So not so many years back, when you try to use automated service, you would get fairly annoyed with the fact that it would send you to the beginning of the line or to the beginning of the menu, and it would not necessarily give you the solution you are looking for, and you would still demand a live person. But this has, again, increased, the quality has increased dramatically. And I think with many companies, many products, many people would prefer to actually handle their to actually hand their problems to an automated service rather than an expert, and that is a significant cost saving.
That's interesting. And you mentioned kind of having that automated response and everything like that. And I want to kind of shift gears a little bit, just because I was thinking about, I used to work in a call center right near a call center. And now it's like, I'm thinking, there's all just going to be chat bots coming up. So I'm thinking, how, bear with me, audience, just for a little bit. I promise I have a point here, but, how far are we away from Star Wars? So what I mean by that is, we have C-3PO, we have these, fully formed robots that are interacting like humans and, can fully comprehend what we're saying. So how far are we away from maybe not C-3PO, but having some of these chat bots that can interact with us on not just a simple basis, but on a large scale, personal basis?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So I don't think Star Wars is anywhere near, or we are far away from it. But the goal is to develop the NLP tools that help us in our daily tasks that are mundane, they're repetitive. At the same time as we're developing, many of the issues come up regarding the safety of these tools, whether they are biased in some sense. It could be, it could appear as fairly malignant problem, but in actuality, it could be fairly big and troublesome flaw. So many experts, and that's what's great with making this technology open source and accessible to everybody. Many experts and individuals, non-experts, are looking into the possible ways that this technology can go wrong or can go rogue. So the safety measures are being implemented as we're developing. So it's not going to be a single leap, in other way, from what we have right now to a very highly sophisticated robot, taking our place. It's going to be a process where I think everyone will have an opportunity to speak out and observe and make notices of what might actually go wrong, and at the same time, those functions can be limited or prevent or disabled in some way, so as to make robots that are more human friendly. And we are seeing this already. There are models that haven't survived this passage of bias test. There are models that have been released and shut down. I think there's Galactica, if I'm not mistaken, by Facebook, that was released for a few days and then was shut down because it was given out results that were either offensive or not taken lightly by the audience. But there are other models like, again, ChatGPT comes to mind, which are being tuned as they are being continuously trained on the incoming data. So anything that has been flagged by users that are also at the same time being testers of the system, all those possibly rogue functionalities are being trimmed and disabled or minimized or rescaled in some way so that they're not threatening to human beings.
And you mentioned constantly testing and changing some of the NLP programs, and I just thought of kind of an interesting follow-up. And one of those things is most people would say that robots and computers don't feel and just kind of interpret data, and that's similar to what they do with NLP. So I'm interested to know, how can AI's use of NLPs really help us when it comes to manner and tone, and make sure that, say if we're writing a briefing or something like that, that it can come off in the right tone and comprehensive at the same time. How can we utilize NLP to help us get our message across effectively, as it were?
Correct. And this is also a training process in a way where we are training the model to understand us and our personality, if it's to represent us. Uh, right now, it's not perfect, but we have tools to correct it. So when playing with tools like ChatGPT, if it returns a particular text that I want to see as a poem, I can actually um, ask it to return a poem. Maybe I felt like at that particular moment, I felt like I wanted to see a poem and send it to somebody else. But the model doesn't know that. Perhaps it will eventually learn that at a particular time of a day or a week, I would like a poem answer as opposed to just a text. Um, and this is adaptive, and the priorities from the user are being, again, observed by the model, by the engineers, and being placed into the system. If there's a high demand for, let's say, the results to be in a particular format, such as poem, not that not that it's a popular format for ChatGPT, but
Mhm.
it's a fun format to try. Then it will be accented by the engineers and by the model itself. So we're hoping to develop models that will adapt to our personalities. To some degree, this is already happening, but there's still a lot to do.
Okay. And audience, this brings us actually to our third question that we want to ask you. So thank you for your responses for those first two. So here's our last audience question we want to ask you. So we want to know, what is your experience interacting with chatbots? So for example, if you're, clicking on an insurance website or a car website or something like that, and a nice chatbot pops up and you kind of got a response. So we want to know, what is your experience interacting with chatbots? And as we kind of wait for your responses, one thing that comes to mind, Oleg, is I want to know, what ethical challenges maybe do we face when it comes to developing NLPs and kind of developing some of these programs through AI?
Another great question that is attracting a great deal of attention. One big question right now is, um, which is ethical, is how much details the language model would actually learn and memorize. We don't want it to member. In most cases, we don't want it to memorize our social security numbers, our phone numbers. This is private, personal information that we want to keep out of a language model that is trained on billions of documents over the web, which is likely to have our personal data somewhere, maybe in a number of places, but we don't want it to be easily accessible. It's no longer personal if it's readily accessible through a language model like this. Um, and again, this is an example of where the engineers would need to use NLP to identify the the social security numbers, partial or complete phone numbers, names, and so on, and remove them from the training before or after the training has been made, um, either from the training documents or from the model once the model has been trained on these documents, and make sure that this doesn't leak out. So the model is some sort of firewall on this detailed personal data. Another example is a bias. We want the documents to be representative of the society that it represents, and it's not always the case. If a model has been trained on, let's say, on documents collected in English language, it may have a certain bias that is used in English-speaking countries. Uh, Whereas this bias may not necessarily translate to non-English speaking countries, and that needs to be accounted for. So we can't necessarily just take a request to, let's say, a large language model in, say, Russian or Chinese, translate it to English, query the database or a model for a particular answer, and then translate it back to original language, because that will carry the language, some sort of language bias, or a bias associated with the culture using that language. So that also needs to be detected, treated in some way, tested that it has been treated, that the answers that are being given out to the end user are representative for that user's experience and environment, and they're not biased in a particular way. So looking for the bias is not trivial, and the model itself doesn't know that it has a bias, not yet. But yeah, experts, psychologists, sociologists need to take a look at these different models and validate whether there's bias. They need to brainstorm and ideate all these different possible biases that individuals may not have detected, that can be dangerous, that can be developing some sort of narrow view on the world. And they need to communicate it back to engineers, and who will hopefully treat that bias, or the most important ones, initially.
And I have a great question I just thought of, but I real quickly just wanted to jump to our audience. Audience, thank you so much for your responses and participating in our Slido poll. And again, you could submit all your questions and everything like that. We still got a little bit of time, so please feel free. If you have a question for Oleg, please feel free to submit those as well. So we're slowly starting to get some responses in, and it looks like, what's your experience interacting with chatbots? So that was the question we asked, and it looks like people actually often do, interact with chatbots and everything like that. So piggybacking off some of our audience responses here, Oleg, do you see a lot of times that people are apprehensive about interacting with a chatbot, or they're almost, or are they used to it essentially? So are they, okay with it, or are they not okay with interacting and working with a chatbot?
Great question. I don't think I am able to immediately tell when I'm interacting with a live person or a chatbot. Um, Although this question is in my mind oftentimes, I think it becomes more apparent when we are not getting the answer we want on a particular try. Then we're a little bit more sensitive and conscious about who is on the other, or what is on the other, and trying to answer our questions. We and the feelings change as well, right? If you think there's a bot, we have this, we are angry at the robots, they're not understanding us. And perhaps the psychologists or sociologists can measure the level of frustration that is raised from this type of experiences or assumptions. But yeah, we pretty much take it for granted then when we do a web search, that it's some sort of algorithms that does the search for us. It wasn't clear to me initially when I played with ChatGPT, because the answers were so realistic. I had a feeling there's a live person there, but I couldn't figure out how it can be that the person answered so fast. And it takes time to settle in this transition from the classical search result to the more semantically driven and semantically aware search result. This transition it takes a little bit of time to accept. Perhaps maybe in a year or two, I will not be as conscious about who is on the other side, or what is on the other side, trying to answer my questions. But yeah, in some situations we're a little bit more aware. Maybe we're looking for something to blame. In the other situations, we're just so used to the technology, we don't think twice.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I've definitely gotten used to is assuming that there's a chat bot on the other line and I'm not actually talking to a person, but I feel like I'm in the minority and I'm old school and I just like talking to a talking to a person. And kind of as we wind down, you mentioned a little bit about bias and some of the ethical questions and things like that. So I want to know, is it too late to put the rabbit back in the hat? So are we too far along where we can't take a step back and say, hey, we need to kind of tweak NLP a little bit? Or can we take a step back and say, okay, we are aware of some of these biases, so let's go in and fix it? Can we still do that?
Very good question. So this question oftentimes comes up, and especially with all the commotion about ChatGPT, in academia in particular, there has been a big question of how is there a way, or should we even prevent this technology from penetrating into the academic mindset? My stand on this is that there's no use or point in trying to roll back this technology or close it completely, because it will pop up elsewhere. This has already been discovered. It's like once you discover that 2 plus 2, or it's not an invention per se, it's discovery that 2 plus 2 is 4, you can't undiscover it. it has to it has to be used to our advantage. But just like the calculators in the old days, they did not make us any more or less creative. We still need to memorize a multiplication table, and we still uh, need to once in a while compute the multiplication in our head, even though the calculators are available. But we can use them for more sophisticated computation. The same with Python. Or any programming languages. We use it to our advantage, even though we still do some of the things, some of the computations manually. Same thing with the NLP and ChatGPT and all these large language models. Once they're rolled out, we should find a safer way of using them, as opposed to trying to scale them back, or even prevent them from development. I think these are great technologies that, if um, if continued to be developed safely for the for the for the humankind, then we can increase the um, uh, quality of life of many individuals around the world. We can balance it so that there is less of a disparity in distribution of knowledge or distribution of wealth all around the globe. And this is a technology that can be used in this case. One example would be an individualized um, uh, tool to learn a particular language or to learn mathematics. Whereas in the past, we needed a teacher, a book. We needed somebody to explain what's in the book and use or um, ignite our creativity and think of different examples and of different solutions to those examples, whether it's a hard science or a soft science. But with large language models, the automated tool can now individually help one person grow in a particular field where that person wants to grow. And this could be delivered to every individual around the world who has a mobile phone, which is which is a commodity now. So I think
And,
it's a great tool which we should keep promoting in a safe way, of course.
and you mentioned some of the different applications in the classroom setting and all that. And I know you're the faculty author for a natural language processing certificate. And we'll drop that link right in there for the audience so they can kind of check it out. So with that as kind of a background, what can folks expect to learn from your NLP course that features Python?
Good question, because uh, even though there's a big talk about large language models, we cover from classical pretty much everything in the spectrum, or major points from the classical NLP, not touching the large language model itself. That needs to be a separate course with neural networks. But we do cover a great deal of so-called word vectors, and that it kind of gets into the territory of representation of text with numbers, or extracting semantic meaning from the text and representing it with numbers. So to kind of briefly go over what's covered in the course is we do quite a bit of Python coding, string manipulation, and then we go into different metrics that must be used for different NLP tasks. Every NLP task requires a particular metric so that things can be automated, or the decisions can be automated, and every metric comes with its benefits and flaws, and those need to be understood, and limitations as well. We also go into machine learning and taking the representations of text and feeding them through machine learning tools such as supervised models, which use, let's say, which classify text into different categories, or unsupervised models, which tend to cluster documents or other pieces of texts into similar groups. We also go into a number of tools that are available and popular on the internet, such as NLTK, Spacey, TextBlob, GenSim, Rake, and so on, and explain how these tools work for a particular problem or task. And we also look into text representation using databases such as WordNet, which has been around for a while. It has its own hand-built semantic representation of different words and vocabulary in its vocabulary. We also explain how all these different tools can be used for production in a company, how we can scale it up with the use of minimal resources so that it's not costly. Even small changes in the code, when scaled up, can create a huge disparity in costs. So those disparities and the sources of those disparities need to be understood so they can be tweaked for different scenarios. So that's pretty much a spectrum of tools. We do look into word vectors and manipulations of vectors and matrices, that kind of a linear algebra, and the use of linear algebra into creating, again, numeric representation of texts. Once you have numeric representation, then you have a full another large spectrum of tools accessible to NLP, such as modeling topics using the matrix decompositions, such as singular value decomposition and some other ones, and so on. There's a lot in that course. There's a lot except the large language models, which is again a huge field of its own. Maybe we'll create a different set of courses just for that.
Yeah, there's only so much we can cover in in a certificate program. And Oleg, thank you so much for joining us. And as we get ready to wrap up, the final question I have for you before we head out for the rest of the day is, what do you see is the future, or rather, what do you see as the future when it comes to NLP?
The future is amazing. Really is. It's the future is here, and it's changing every day. We are excited about anything that comes out in this field. This field has shown or has been very fruitful in what it's delivered over the past 3-5 years, and I think it's more than met or exceeded our expectations. What we should expect more is, again, development of more realistic large language models, which have been shown to be useful and fun to play with. So lots of scientists, for various reasons, are attacking or tackling this field this direction. So once you have people, experts are looking in a particular branch of NLP, you should certainly expect great developments in there. So GPT-4, I think, is out. I haven't tried it, but it's received great ratings and reviews. We're yet to see ChatGPT being um, uh, backed by this technology, but at the same time, you have companies like Microsoft and um, Google that are jumping on this large language model trains that want to develop their own um, models that they can use. And of course, it will be cheaper for them than using somebody else's. And yeah, that's the direction that I would expect. And then what we haven't yet seen um, at scale is the use of these technologies in the companies. It still is somewhat expensive, and OpenAI, or I think it's Microsoft now, is being careful about releasing this technology to everybody. So there's quite a bit of scrubbing that needs to go on before they would give access to a particular company. But we would expect that, yeah, pretty much everything would be backed by a communication with this some sort of large language model, not just in text but also in voice. I think what we haven't seen yet as much is connecting the voice to the large language model so that the response that we hear back is a sound as opposed to text. And of course, we could see, and this has already been developed, but maybe not as widespread, connecting the imagery to the text as well. So there are lots of wonderful models like eDALI, uh, which take text and produce images. But this is very restrictive now. They're still charging money for it, I believe, and it's not yet, again, not yet penetrated through different sectors and industries. So I think this will become cheaper for the companies. It will become safer, and the companies that hold keys to these technologies will eventually and gradually allow access to it uh, and find ways to monetize and use that money to produce greater technologies. I would really like to see, and I'm not sure how far we are from this, but I would really like to see the NLP models being used in academia to help individuals learn a particular subject. So just like we are using MOOCs now, which is a fairly common tool, MOOCs as the massive online something course, or the Coursera and eCornell, and there are many companies that produce a great variety of courses accessible to individuals. I would like to see all these different language tools to be used for more individualized learning, where the tool in some way detects the level of understanding from the user and then tailors the content for that user in particular. I'm really hoping that eCornell will be the first one to jump on this, and hopefully in the near future produce something that is a breakthrough in the field of learning.
Definitely. When we get there, Oleg, we'll definitely make sure to get back with you, do another keynote. Well, thank you so much, audience. Oleg, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time. Audience, we just have one last thing. We want to know kind of how we did. So we'll put up a QR code when we finish up and just kind of give us a response as far as what we could improve. If you like the conversation, let us know. Audience, again, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Have a great weekend. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe out there. Oleg, again, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys at the next keynote. Have a good afternoon, and again, stay safe, and talk to you soon.